Welcome to Mainstream Media, a place where the news is male-friendly. And tonight we're going to be talking about some very male-friendly things. That is the conference that's coming up in Detroit. And by the way, before we go any farther, there's tickets still on sale for the conference. Please get them tonight, because Paul, I think, is going to up the price after we get off the air. So buy those tickets now before they go up in price. And let's talk about that conference. Gentlemen, Paul, can you start us off? Tell us about the conference. Where do we go?
Well, I can tell you this is going to be, I think, one of the most incredible events in terms of the history of the men's movement in this country, as we're finding out, is a lot longer than most people think. I found out recently that there was an attempt to have an international conference on men's rights in Vienna in 1929, and opponents to it shut it down. And we are going to do some correction, a corrective experience in 2014 by having the conference. It is on 100%. We have the support of the venue manager. We have the greatest lineup of speakers you can imagine, and everything is a go. We're crossing all of our I's, or we're not crossing our I's, we're dotting them, but we are crossing our T's. And everything looks set up to have a fantastic conference. I do want to let people know, just as Tom said, that probably within an hour of the end of this broadcast, I am, for the last week of the conference, raising the price. If you want to get the best deal possible to get in, go in and buy your tickets now. You can place this program on hold while you go to abortionman.com, purchase your ticket, and you can come back and restart it, and you won't miss a thing. But what we don't want you to miss is this conference, because it's going to be something real amazing. Tom and Warren both, but before I even continue, I feel like we're being neglectful. I want to say hello to Warren Farrell, and get him to say hi to everybody, and then I'll have a couple more words to say. But we're joined by the incredible Warren Farrell, as usual.
I'm really glad to be here. This Mainstream Media is really a dream come true.
It is a lot of fun, too. But as I was saying, this has been, most of you who are, I can't imagine anybody that follows A Voice for Men that does not remember November of 2012 and the absolutely insane protests that happened at the University of Toronto, and a tragic, embarrassing event, too, where people who simply wanted to go in and hear Warren speak about issues that affect boys, and particularly boys and young men, were harassed, doors were blocked, police were assaulted, all sorts of epithets being thrown at people who were trying to attend. It was a pretty disgraceful show, and it really does show you sort of what the opposition is like, simply through talking about issues that affect men and boys without the ideological filter, to just talk about evidence-based solutions, and to talk in a way that's compassionate and designed to look at men as having problems versus men as the problem. And when you start talking about men as having problems instead of men as the problem, it brings out some of the real unfortunate bigotry in our society, and this conference has been no exception. But I want to point out that this resistance goes back. We got evidence of it in 1929. We had it in Warren's lecture at the University of Toronto. We saw it in the life of Erin Pitsey, who was stalked and harassed out of her country 4 years ago for talking outside the ideological narrative of what domestic violence is about. We have researchers, esteemed academicians like Richard Gels and Suzanne Steinmetz and Murray Strauss, all receiving death threats and bomb threats for simply talking about an issue like domestic violence outside the ideological narrative. There has been an organized and very, very fascist resistance to this kind of discussion for a long, long time. But as the old saying goes, that evil flourishes when I think good human beings are silent and say nothing. We are a group of people that are going to stand and talk. We fought long and hard to do this, to make this conference happen. We're very determined. We invite people who disagree with us to come and sit and attentively listen to what we have to say, and in the question and answer sessions to challenge us. All ideas. If your idea can't survive questions, then it's probably a lie. We need to be subjected to scrutiny, and it's important to subject all people's thinking to scrutiny, but not to censorship. We're not going to abide by the censorship. We have secured a great deal of police security and private security for this event. We're going to keep everybody safe and sound, but we are going to talk about these issues. And we are going to come back next year and have another conference and talk about these issues until they start becoming more part of mainstream consciousness, and until we can start actually addressing many of the issues that affect men and boys that are now, quite frankly, very neglected in our culture. And that's my opening statement for this, and as usual, I'm always sitting here waiting to hear what Warren has to say.
Yeah, I think, Paul, before I get on to me, could you elaborate a little bit about giving people some idea of what you've faced? I mean, one of the things that was so instructive to me, and I think we often talk about the issue of framing our movement as men's rights versus men's liberation, and one of the values of framing it as men's rights is that sometimes it rubs people a little bit the wrong way, and then you find then people come out of the woodwork who are examples of the type of things that we have to fight that we don't often see. So what I saw in Toronto was 100 feminist, Socialist Worker Party feminists who were venomous. But I could say things like that, and if it wasn't on videotape that this guy named Steve Brule happened to be taping, no one would believe me. They would think I was the problem and I was exaggerating. And I think what happened when you did this conference, you saw by the fact that your website often articulates things fairly strongly, you saw people come out that way exaggerated, and you saw the venom come out, and the death threats, and the Hilton Hotel withdrawing, and there was every effort to postpone this conference. And I think that, while I tend to be more diplomatic in my orientation, and think words like men's liberation are sort of where I tend to come into the verbiage from. One of the values of making the verbiage stronger is sometimes surfacing for the average person to see the level and of male hatred that is just underneath the surface, that gets brought out when words are a little bit stronger, that sometimes don't get brought out by people like me who tend to be a bit more diplomatic. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'd say on probably 95%. One of the things, though, there's a slight caveat that I want to point out, that while A Voice for Men was a popular blog, it was not known generally to the protesters in November of 2012. We weren't on the map that greatly yet. And what that proves to me is that even now, in this modern culture, as opposed to, say, 20 or 30 years ago, that in modern culture, even the most tactfully framed addressing of issues that affect men and boys has begun to draw out the hatred from ideologues. And so it's maybe a little bit different. But what we've experienced here, I think the worst part, and one, I want to assure everybody, I sleep fine at night. I'm excited. I'm happy in my life. My partner and I have been drawn closer by this experience. Our relationship has become closer because of this experience. My friendships with the people that I work with has been strengthened because of this, and our resolve has been strengthened. I'm doing just fine. I think the worst emotional part of this for me has been some sadness at what I've seen in terms of elements even in the mainstream media. I'm talking about people like Time Magazine, who will be attending this conference, have written articles that are trying to develop a threat narrative to make people in the men's movement look like they're a threat to society, which has resulted in more threats to us. I'm really concerned that, not so much for myself, but the reputations of people. We have Senator Ann Cools, we have Warren Farrell, we have academicians from really across the world. We have individuals coming from India. These are not even people, most of them, that write fiery blog posts full of provocative rhetoric like I do. And to try to characterize, if you want to go after me that way, that's fine. But I have been saddened by the blatant dishonesty and the deception of people who would characterize anybody who wants to discuss men's issues as hating women or promoting rape or promoting violence against women. But in the end, 20 years of working with alcoholism and addiction in people, if it didn't teach me anything else, it taught me a healthy sense of detachment. You can't invest emotionally in people's insanity or their dishonesty. You have to look at it objectively. So that's what I've done. Overall, this has been an enriching, positive experience, and I think that we are starting to see the world take notice of what's really going on in this arena.
Yes. And if I can argue your side of the point on that issue, when I spoke at the University of Toronto, it was on boys' issues and the boy crisis, and the things that I was being protested against were things that were sort of distorted excerpts out of the myth of male power, and so it was from the more challenging parts of my writing that, especially if you took it out of context, could be could easily be distorted. And so, but the most important thing I think that people who are listening that don't understand what we're up against need to understand is that after that protest, the Public Employees Student Union, which makes policy for most of the colleges in Canada, said that any discussion of men's issues, any organization that focus on or even include men's issues in their charter is to be considered ipso facto misogynist, anti-male. And so that is how far it went. And if you really didn't hear what I said, just go back over this part of the tape again, because it is just astonishing that that at a university, I mean, I grew up in the 60s when Mario Savio and people like myself and Jerry Rubin were talking about the free speech movement. Liberals and universities were invested in free speech and questioning the status quo. It was question authority with the stickers that were around. And now we have people saying, when you were two women at Ryerson College who applied for a charter to get to be able to speak about men's issues as part of a whole at Ryerson College, they were not allowed to get a charter to do that because they were including, among other things, in gender, men. It's as if gender is not allowed to include men, which I still think today men are a portion of gender. And so it's just this is how outrageous it has become.
How misogynistic for you to say that, Warren.
Yeah,
to imply that men are a part of this equation. I saw somebody, I don't know if it was a quote, but I saw something the other day that really rung as very true for me, and is that valid ideas and reasonable ideas invite questions. Lies have a thin skin.
Yes, indeed.
You would think so, but it's almost as though the lies that we've seen, as far as people battering Warren in Toronto and the people battering the conference in Detroit, those lies are not getting very much airtime in some ways. If it was any other group that was being discriminated against, if it was blacks or women or Jews or whatever, you would think that this kind of thing would be front page news. But it's not.
Stefan Molyneux brought up in an interview and who will be speaking at the conference, brought up in an interview that I had with him last night. Imagine the reaction that if women wanted to have a conference and there were death threats and bomb threats and threats to kill people and public efforts to protest their free speech and shut it down. Imagine what the reaction socially would be.
Precisely.
This culture would collectively lose its mind if something like that happened.
Yes.
Or if if a synagogue were being blocked by Christians for a conference on Jewish culture or African American culture, as you were saying, Tom, it is really inconceivable. And so what are we dealing with here? What we're dealing with is really that, Tom, I know that you really heard me say this a number of times, which is that this is the only that every society that has survived based on its ability to train its sons to be disposable. So
yes.
if your survival is based on being able to dispose of men in war to protect you, or dispose of men in the workplace to be able to handle the hazardous jobs that need to be done, like building bridges and building towers and building homes, or doing extracting coal for your heat. If your survival is dependent upon getting a group of people to risk disposability, you are not very easily going to question what your survival is dependent upon. And that's what our genetic heritage is about, is making sure that we bribe men to think of themselves as heroes by risking their life. And when you bribe men all throughout all of your history to think of themselves as heroes by risking their life and being disposable, that is not something you've had a genetic heritage of playing in that direction. So when we give scholarships to kids to play football and risk concussions and spinal cord injuries and dislocated shoulders, there's no way we would be paying taxpayer money in high school to have girls risk spinal cord injuries, dislocated shoulders, and then call it glory when they did. We'd immediately call it child abuse. We'd immediately condemn the culture for paying taxpayer money to risk spinal cord injuries and concussions. And if there was a group of people that ignored the fact that girls' concussions, when they got 2 or more, could have long-term implications for their intelligence and their functionality for the rest of their life. If any organization like the NFL did that to a group of females, that organization would be subject to lawsuits and challenges and disgrace and shame in the culture. And so we spend time from a very early age encouraging our boys to take the risk of being disposable, and then we wonder why they're not paid attention to when they have a complaint. When they have a complaint, they're considered whining, and girls and women never fell in love with whining males. They always fell in love with alpha males. And that's what we're up against. We're up against something that is so deeply engaged in your culture, in the culture, that no one really can challenge it.
Yes, that's one of the things that I've gotten from you, Warren, is that we have men who are disposable, but those who are disposable, you don't worry about their pain in the same kind of way as those who are not disposable. And it reminds me of, once I knew this guy who had a big pet snake. It was a boa constrictor. It was about 15 feet long. It was huge. And he used to feed the snake little pinkies, these little white mice, Mm-hmm. And he loved the snake. I mean, he just loved the snake. But I started thinking about it the other day. I was thinking, he really got attached to the snake, but he never got attached to the white mice. He'd just throw them in the cage, and boom, they'd get eaten. I thought, that's kind of like men. And I thought, imagine what would happen if one of those white mice stood up and said, wait a minute, I'm not going to be eaten by the snake. What would happen? Forget about it. You're getting eaten. There'd be no question. People would be like, oh, that's ridiculous. You're supposed to be eaten. And the whole thing is sort of similar to what we see now with men. And the bigotry is so strong. It's so easy to see. It's amazing that people's eyes are so shut to it. At least that's how I see it.
No, I totally agree. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah, this reminds me, it was just a few nights ago when I actually did have a few minutes to myself. I just started looking back and thinking about a lot of very large projects in humanity, from the pyramids to the Panama Canal to the aqueducts to many roads that we have built through mountain passes and these magnificent dams and all these projects that have claimed the lives of so many men in the process. And in a way, I understand it. It's like we enjoy a standard of living and a civilization. Look at the technology and the fact that we don't even, I mean, if we want to cool off on a hot day, we just walk into an air-conditioned room. And a lot of that, not taking anything away from the contributions of women to society, but a lot of our standard of living, our safety, our ability to travel, our ability to fly across the world on a moment's notice is based on male ingenuity, on male ingeniousness, and on male sacrifice. So I really understand why culturally we have a certain tendency at sacrifice to look the other way. That if we wanted running water everywhere and we wanted to have big roads to drive on and safe divided highways and all these services and this incredible standard of living, that we had to look a certain amount the other way at the expense that was paid to get there. But I find it so incredibly ironic in this day and age that what we have is people who claim to be about gender equality rushing at us to say, no, you must keep looking the other way no matter what is happening. You have to keep doing what you've always done, which is sacrifice. That's your only role here, is to sacrifice, to pay the price. So what if there's injustice in it? So what if you have men suiciding over family courts? So what if men are killing themselves at 4 times, 5 times the rate of women? So what if men are falling out of education? So what if men are being mutilated genitally at birth as a matter of routine? And if you touched a woman there, it would be terrible. We have the very people who claim to be about escaping gender roles and having choice in life, shrieking at us and threatening us to keep us from doing that very thing. It's a very crazy time, but that occurs to me that is exactly what's happening in this culture right now.
It is crazy, and my own perception is that it's like a Mobius strip. You ever seen a Mobius strip? Mobius strip has just one side. You know, and that's the way these gender folks think. I mean, it's like there's one side. There's no male side. It's only a female side. It's a Mobius strip. It's one-sided. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at.
I think feminists looked at the world, well, first of all, they looked at the world through the Marxism and then through the civil rights movement. And the common denominator of Marxism and civil rights movement is in both there was an oppressor and an oppressed. And so they saw the world, and so when they started to, when they came into women's liberation at the beginning of feminism, it was in the context of Lenin, who said the family was a patriarchal system that was designed to benefit men at the expense of women, and so that became very anti-family very quickly. But there was sort of a need to find out who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed, and for feminists there wasn't even a question about that. In the old, in Marxist theory, it was the rich that were the oppressors and the working class that was the oppressed. And now the rich were the people that were working and the more likely to be the wealthy, they were more likely to be men, and so they were the oppressors and women were the oppressed. And so, and the problem with that is that in male-female relationships, men and women both sacrifice rights and our grandparents didn't talk about rights, they talked about responsibilities and obligations, and they both sacrifice themselves, men in war and men in work, so that their children could have better jobs than they had. And most of the railroads in the United States were built by Chinese that came over here interned, and they had spent 7 years working in order to pay for their transportation, another 7 years to pay for their wife, and then their children. And usually by the time their children got over here, they were close to dead or dead. And so, and that was a type of sacrifice that they did, even if the mothers risked their lives in childbirth. And both parents were hoping to make their children's lives better than their lives would be, so that they wouldn't have those sacrifices. And to honor only the mothers as ones who are interested in sacrifice, and not the fathers, it's such a distortion of history. So to try to make the male-female relationship into the same type of dynamic as oppressor oppressed, misses the very understanding of life, that it was not men that were in charge, it was survival that was in charge. It wasn't patriarchy that was the issue, it was survival that was the issue. So I think it's really very relevant and perfect that we are having this first Men's Issues International Conference and the VFW building, the Veterans of Foreign War building, because these are the men who, more than anybody else, made these sacrifices, and today, among people who returned from Afghanistan and Iraq, there are 25 people who commit suicide for each person who died in the wars in Iraq and Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, the amount of untended to damage that comes from seeing a friend of yours get blown up and his body gets spattered in front of you, or hear planes and bombs come over and never know when the next noise is going to mean a plane or bomb coming over, and the amount of damage that is done to the psyche when we are exposed to combat, and then to not handle the troops when they come back and have problems of people waiting for sometimes months and sometimes weeks and sometimes years for the veterans of foreign wars to even give them an appointment in their hospostals, and not the veterans hospitals, the VA, giving appointments to soldiers who are asking for help, not giving psychological help at deep levels that are at least equivalent to the amount of time that they spent in combat. These are things that we don't even think about in any deep level, and they're part of when we do damage by neglecting these men who are committing suicide, their entire family, women, men, and children, and their parents are deeply affected, and their extended family is too. And so this is just an example of the ripple effect of not caring about our male disposability.
Yes.
It's really, I think, fascinating you brought that up, because this ties. I'm going to go back to a question you asked earlier and address it some more, Warren. I was, again, in my talk yesterday with Stefan Molyneux, it came up that one of the people that, because the VFW has received several calls saying, oh my God, you can't host these horrible people, you can't let them talk there. And the commander of the VFW engaged one of the people just talking with them, and it turned out it was revealed in the course of the conversation that the individual he was talking with did not know what a VFW was.
Oh my God.
And so that sort of thing makes me want to cry sometimes. But am I surprised at that? Absolutely not. I am absolutely not surprised that somebody shrieking that we hate women and that we support rape and that we should not be allowed to speak also has no clue whatsoever what a VFW facility is or why it's there, or any clue about the countless men that have paid the ultimate price for that facility to be there, and the fact that it's run by people who have paid terribly dear prices for their opportunity to have a VFW hall. But to go back, when you were talking earlier about the rhetoric, Warren, and how that you and I address this from a different approach, we look at things differently. One, I want to say that's a tremendously good thing, because we need a range of different voices. We need women speaking to these issues. We need women speaking to these issues extremely assertively. We need women that are speaking to them academically and from other angles. We need men doing the same thing. We need people that are religious or non-religious, straight and gay, black and white, the whole spectrum, which is what the men's movement is. I mean, many people in the media do not want to acknowledge that, but come the press conference at 3 p.m. on Friday the 26th, with a camera on it, they won't be able to deny it. But where it concerns the rhetoric that I've used that has come from ABFM, I want to say with no hostility whatsoever that I have no apology for anything that I've said at all. We are talking about people that are suffering and dying, people that are falsely imprisoned, people whose lives are destroyed. If you're not angry about this, as the saying goes, you're not paying attention. And you're supposed to be angry at injustice. Am I provocative? Yes, I've been provocative many times, and I'm actually even softer tone now than I was 4 years ago. And there's a reason for that. That is because we have started pushing and forcing the dialogue in this culture. I never offended anybody with just the sole intent of feeling personally smug about offending people. What I was doing was calculated, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. We need some people. We don't need everybody. We need Warren Farrell to be Warren Farrell. We really do. We need that guy out there doing exactly what he does, the way that he does it, because he reaches and impacts the lives of many people and changes their thinking. We also need people that are willing to raise a fist, not in violence, but in defiance, and to say, this is wrong, and we're not going to mince words about how wrong it is, and we're not going to apologize about being angry about it, and understand that we get that society, not just feminists, that society at large ignores the pain and suffering of men. We get that that's been a part of humanity, but society is also going to need to get that there is an increasing and growing element of society that is saying you're not going to ignore it anymore. You can not like that we're provocative, and the best remedy that I can offer anybody that is to start paying attention to the issues and start looking at them in a more balanced way. Because what I found in 20 years as a counselor, and I talk to, and still now, I talk to wounded men and women who have been affected by these problems, and the thing is, if you acknowledge their pain, the anger lessens. If you address their pain and empathize with it, their anger lessens. I'm going to steal from Warren here. If you have a rewind button and you're not getting that part of the talk, rewind this video. If you address people's pain and suffering, their anger will decrease. Their vitriol will decrease, and they will soften and work with you. If, however, people are suffering, and they're suffering injustice, and they express anger, and you shame them, you're only going to get more anger. That is human physics, people. I didn't create that. I didn't make that up. It's the way things are, and it's going to continue. But thankfully, I think we're making just a little bit of headway now, and hopefully with a few more years and a lot of people continuing to work on this, we will reach a point that Paul Nathanson talks about, a dialogue instead of a debate. That is what ultimately we want. We want these differing factions to talk to each other and to put ideas on the table and to work together for evidence-based solutions. And that right now is up, in my opinion, to them.
I hope you know that, Paul, that I very much agree with you on all of what you said. Not 95% of it, but 100%. I think that we do need the success of any movement requires multiple voices from many different perspectives. And part of what I have learned when I teach my couples communication workshops is that anger is vulnerability's mask. And when you hear somebody that's angry, instead of responding with fear, just think of their vulnerability. And when you tap into their vulnerability and you hear their pain, then they have less and less reason to be angry. One of the solutions to domestic violence is not to tell people get rid of your power. It's to teach people how to hear somebody else, because a person who feels heard does not have a reason to escalate, does not have a reason to be angry. So whenever we hear anger, look at our own tools to be able to solve the problem of anger. And the biggest tool is a good ear, is empathy, is a heart that opens up to that person, and almost always that transforms it into a dialogue. And so, but I also think in the larger picture of what you're saying, that men's issues needs everything from the angry person to the academic from the gay to the straight, from the African American male experience to the white male experience, to the females that are involved with these men at every level. And so it really is a time for everybody to be aboard. I think one of the great things you've done at this conference is to invite people from all of those backgrounds there. So when the Time magazine type people come out to cover it with a preconception, they're going to either have to lie or modify their preconception.
Indeed. And what is Time magazine going to see at this conference? Can we talk a little bit about the conference itself and the content?
Sure.
Is that a good direction?
Yeah, maybe, Tom, why don't you, because you haven't been talking for a little bit here, why don't you start out with what you're going to be sharing at the conference?
Oh, you know, I was just thinking that what I'll be sharing is talking about men's unique ways of processing their emotions. You know, men have a very unique path and a unique way of processing emotions that oftentimes is invisible. People don't see it, and there's good reasons for people not to see it, because men know damn well that openly emoting in public is a dumb thing to do. And we'll be talking about the 4 reasons that men's pain is invisible. Then we'll be talking about the different ways that men have found, creative ways, to process their pain. And most people don't see it. Come to the conference, you'll get an idea about how you can start seeing how men do in fact process their pain. Because the bottom line is, a man's pain is taboo. A man's pain is against the rules of this culture. If you're the white mouse and you stand up and say, my heart hurts, that's not going to get you anything. You're going to get fed to the snake no matter what. And so men know this. They know that their pain is taboo. They've found very creative ways to work with that. And it goes invisible. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about. Warren, what are you going to talk about?
Yeah, I'll be talking about a few things. One is, in the workshop, I'll be looking at 2 issues. One is the crisis that boys are going through. And people who don't know me don't know that I'm very cautious about words like crisis. So I think that something has to reach a pretty high bar to get to be okay with me for crisis. And boys are really suffering very deeply in the education area. Most people have a sense of that. What they don't have is the degree to which the mental health problems of boys are expanding and becoming problematic. They don't have a sense of the physical health problems. They don't have a sense of the economic problems, the way that that men who were not academic have in the past been able to use their muscle, been able to use mechanics, and now jobs in the future will be much more mental and microchip oriented and people oriented. And so how are we going to plan to help our sons adjust to an economy that is going to be changing a great deal in the future? What are the prices of not making that adjustment? And so then I'll be looking at one of the deepest problems that boys have, which is a lack of good role models. And when you're a boy and you're looking at the fact that your dad is making a living selling something he doesn't believe in, and his often coming home late, and then his mom and dad get into trouble, and then suddenly there's a divorce, and then suddenly he's living in a home without his dad, and he's hearing his dad badmouth, and his dad is living in a small place and depressed, and he's imagining what's his future going to be, and so that does not inspire a high level of motivation when you see that your own major male role model is depressed and living alone and working hard to pay money for a home he can't live in and children he can't see, or told that he's the enemy. And for the boys that this is the problem, or for boys who see this a great deal, this is really, there's almost an unconscious wisdom in the failure to launch of some boys. And so the importance and not understanding what dads bring. You were talking about, Tom, how grieving processes are different for males and females, and also parenting styles are extremely different for males and females. But with males and females and the parenting process, what we need is both the mother and the father. The parenting process is designed by nature as to be a checks and balances when children don't have the protection and nurturance of moms, and they don't have the encouragement to take risks and the encouragement to try new things and the encouragement to sort of ask questions like why and the boundary enforcement that dads tend to bring to bear. And these roles can be reversed, of course. But if they don't have both of these sets of skills in their life, they are deprived. And we now have not just a theory about that, but we have about 30 years of solid data about that, of showing what happens to children in 30 plus different areas: psychological areas, mental health areas, physical health areas, academic areas, social skill areas like empathy and like assertiveness. When boys don't have a lot of father involvement, they suffer in more than 30 different areas. Now it is documented, not just and not just correlated, but the controls have been controlled for, and we see now that it is caused. It isn't just over a short period of time. We now have longitudinal studies. So we have really good science to show the involvement of fathers and how important that is. It's extremely important for our daughters, but it's even important at another level for our sons, because in our fathers, our sons see their future.
Mm. Indeed. Paul, how about you? What are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be talking I wanted to take the opportunity to talk from a little bit of a different angle than I've ever talked about before. You know, most of the stuff I do addressing men's issue is deeply connected to my background as a counselor and into many of the things that I observed in the struggles of men and even at the hands of the mental health industry, unfortunately. What there's also, and maybe a lot of people don't know it, is that I have actually quite a few years of blue-collar experience myself, and I'm going to talk about some of that. I actually, as a matter of fact, and I don't even know how many people know it, but I started A Voice for Men while driving a semi from the Mexican border all the way up to Yellowknife in Canada, all over the United States and Canada. A lot of it was hauling oil field rigs and components to different places way out in the mountains, and there were many times I was driving something that was tremendously heavy and tremendously large, up and down mountain grades with a stone wall on one, or rock wall on one side of me and a 2,000-foot drop off on the other. And at the end of those nights, I would put a laptop up on the steering wheel of the semi and write. And that is essentially the first work that I did on A Voice for Men. But the experience of working with blue-collar men also dramatically impacted my perspective of men. I remember one time loading pipe for an oil rig, and the truck next to me had a guy loading pipe, and one of the chains broke, and 2,000-pound pipe showered down on this guy and killed him, not 15 feet from me. And all the men I worked with were men that were doing this incredibly dangerous work. It is treacherous to go through icy mountain passes with these things, and they were, all of them, they were 98% men, and they were working hard for their families, working hard to get money to take care of their kids' education, men that were putting their children through college so that they didn't have to do what he was doing. And I also experienced, unfortunately, the condescension in our culture toward blue-collar workers, going in places and having people look down their nose at me because I was just a truck driver. And the sort of pain that's associated with that, I think, is something worth mentioning. Men's pain is worth mentioning. It's not that I want to sit around and have a session of Oprah and pass Kleenex and cry about all these terrible experiences. That's not it at all. But the biggest problem that we have, I think, in this culture is not understanding that men's lives, in generally speaking, are not about power. They're about very hard work. They're about dangerous work. They're about sacrificing for people that they love without complaining. And, you know, it was culturally, in that area of work, it was very, very unpopular and condescended on to complain. Don't complain about the hours you're working. Don't complain about your pain. Oh, you hurt your leg? Well, put another sock on and go. We got a job to do. You're tired? Get some coffee. Shut up and get back to work. That is the environment. And it's not, I don't think anybody wanted a gold star for that. But I think in relation to what I was talking about earlier with this culture just looking so hard the other way at the struggles of men and what they experience, that part of what the men's movement means to me is engaging society to say, look, okay, men sacrifice. We're not saying that we want men to only be selfish and only think about themselves. But we also think society needs to slow down and look at the fact that if you think men's lives are about running the world, then you must either, one, live with a congressman, or two, and have never done anything else. But I heard, I think it was Jack Hammer that said that looking at men in government and deciding they have all the power is like looking at women in grocery stores and saying they have all the food. It is just not sensible. And so I'm going to be talking about that some and some of my experiences and the fact that we owe a debt of appreciation to our blue-collar men in this world for giving us this incredible standard of living. And for men that work down in sewers and that pick up garbage every morning so that we don't have to live in filth. And we've gotten to the point that we dishonor all that. We say only a garbage collector. Oh, God, he works in a sewer. Oh, man, he works with his hands. I want to date an account, a CPA. I don't want to mess around with this guy. And that's fine. That's everybody's choice. But I think that we have lost our sense of honor for men that make the real world, the one that we live in, and the one that we take care of our families in. We've lost a sense of honor for those men, and I want to talk about the fact that that's a bad thing for society.
Yes. Boy, I so agree with you. When I was doing the research for the Myth of Male Power, one of the things I was talking about was sort of a garbage collector, and so I sort of said, you remember this story? Yes, so I asked the garbage collector that collected garbage at our house if I could ride with him for a while, and he looked and said, no, I'm not really allowed to let you do that, and it's against union rules and blah blah blah. And I said, come on, just a block or so. We got to talking and let me go a good part of the route. But I remember one moment in particular where he's picking up a black bag from a dentist's office. And blood just the bag gets ripped and the blood from the dentist's office just spills out of that bag, and he had to deal with that and deal with cleaning it up. And it was just like one thing after the other that we just put out there in our and I have myself done, I'm sure, some of this as well, just put out there and expect somebody to take care of for us, and no one appreciated that he got up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Often in places like Michigan, goes out in ice and sleet and snow, and we just have no appreciation for that. I wanted to ask you, Paul, now you're a counselor, and how do you sort of sense that people look at you now versus when you were only a truck driver? Can you maybe describe the body language, the differences in respect that you get now versus then?
Well, oddly enough, I was a counselor before I was a truck driver.
Oh, really? Wow.
It's a long story about making the transition, but safe to say when I decided to do it, I became an owner-operator because I actually grew up in a generation where truck drivers were kind of a revered group of people, where they were considered knights of the highway and that they had freedom and that they worked independently and make good livings. Of course, now they've turned that industry into sweatshops on wheels for the most part, but it was a huge difference. Oh my goodness, the difference in terms of how people treated me. And even now, if I'm telling somebody my story, you can watch their affect change when I talk about my years directing clinical programs and writing programs for people and teaching. other counselors. That's one level of interest, that's one level of engagement from people. And then when I talk about truck driving, it is a total different change in affect. And it wasn't just, I noticed a difference between people who I interacted with at the times, but even now I can have a conversation with most people, and I would be more reluctant to tell them about truck driving than I would be about counseling, because people seem to associate blue-collar work with a lack of intelligence, or perhaps a lack of sophistication. So yeah, there's a huge difference in the way people treat you between white-collar and blue-collar work, and there is some sort of while there used to be maybe some sort of mystique around some blue-collar work, I think that's all been evaporated from society. I think we live in a culture that just takes it for granted that there's a magic cold air fairy that pushes cool air into their living rooms every night, and that when they flush the toilet, that somehow the magical poop fairy takes everything away, and nothing ever, and that repairs are done by making a phone call, and then the magical repair people come out, and then they disappear, and you don't think about them.
Are you saying that these things are not true?
Well, I heard rumor that there's actually a lot of predominantly men that dig holes in the ground to work on pipes, that work in the scorching sun, that work in filth that is, you talked about the garbage collector and the blood from the dentist's office. I remember reading that when your book came out. I remember how much that struck me, and how much even then I never really considered it, right? I never really thought about it because that was previous to doing any blue-collar work. But yeah, I think when we hear people talking about the end of men and that they're sort of irrelevant anymore, I think they would get a very rude awakening if what men do suddenly disappeared in like about 20 minutes.
When they can't flush their toilet.
When they can't flush their toilet, when their home, if they have a roof on it, is 125 degrees inside, when there's filth around them, when there's nobody to protect them, when crime comes and visit them in really great neighborhoods, when things that break don't get repaired again. This is why when I even saw the title, The End of Men, I laughed hysterically. Give the world 20 minutes without men and see what happens.
Yeah. I think it's what you're saying. I think is so crucial, and so sometimes when I do presentations, I just take apart the building that we're in and see how every portion of that building, from the air conditioning to the heat to the beams and so on, are each built by predominantly men, and it sometimes gives people a visual experience of that. It also reminds me too of the people will often say that women are the civilizing force in the world, and women help civilize men, and there's truth to that, and I'd like to acknowledge that. And there's also truth to the opposite of that, that by fighting the wars and going off and risking our lives and having to tough it out, we take it away. Women don't have to do that. They don't have to steal their psyche, go out and risk their lives. They don't have to sleep in trenches overnights and be filthy and eat awful food and be away from their family. And so our taking care of that for women civilizes women. Our taking care of being able to, when you flush the toilet, being able to have all the stuff that is processed through that toilet be taken care of largely by men. Sewers built, homes built. Those are all things that do chip away at our being pampered and civilized and being able to focus on the arts and on introspection. And those are things that men take care of for women, that allow women plenty of space to do that. And most men don't mind doing that. They do mind being told that not appreciated for it at all. Men require very little appreciation. But to be condemned as a gender and being told that we're not useful and that's sort of deeply sad for many men. And when men feel that they would like to try to say something about it, and then they get condemned and looked at really negatively, and see that saying something about it and expressing their feelings only creates more problems than solutions, then they withdraw, and then we wonder why eventually they either commit suicide, drink, gamble, have an affair, or seek out somebody who they think will listen to them for a few minutes, maybe a prostitute.
Indeed.
Let me be the first to remind everybody, especially the quote miners, we now have Dr. Farrell on tape saying that men have a civilizing effect on women.
Indeed. And let me be the first to say that AVFM has its first ice road trucker in Paul Elam.
I can't even imagine how you handled that. You said
me either. I want to hear more, Paul.
You said 98% men. I have not seen a trucker in the circumstances that you've described. I've never seen a woman in that. Are there any women doing that type of, oil rig hauling?
I saw
one.
I saw one, and she was very skilled, a very good, hardworking individual. But in all the hundreds of people that I met that were doing this particular job, which is hauling oil and natural gas rigs from Houston, mainly up into Colorado and into Wyoming, I saw one woman in all that. All the rest of them were men.
I assume the natural grass rig was in Colorado.
Yes.
Oh, Warren.
Don't start me on that.
Gentlemen, it's been fun tonight. I think we're coming up on an hour. So we usually try to keep these to about 50 minutes. And I think we've had a good time tonight. Any closing comments?
I'm fine. Yeah, maybe if I had a quick closing comment, it would be that there are so many incredible speakers that you've invited to this first Men's Issues Conference. There are a wide range of people, personalities, backgrounds, all from the academic to the activist, from the senator to the journalist, and so on. This is really a rich conference, and it's at a point in history where, for the first time, men's issues are really being lifted into the mainstream media. When Time magazine and other places are covering our issues, and people are coming in internationally to cover our issues. This is, and really, when I say our issues, I mean women's issues, men's issues, and children's issues, because the family is very different than in civil rights, the slave owner and the slave. The family, either the entire ship sinks or the entire ship is able to survive, and we're all in the boat together. And so these are really our issues, are really all of our issues.
And I just want to say, to add to that, Warren, that's really true. The lineup of speakers, even though that A Voice for Men organized it, sometimes I look at it and just can't believe that this particular group of people are going to be together in one place. There's also going to be some very significant people in the press conference. Dr. Helen Smith will be there. Suzanne Venker will be there. Carnell Smith is going to participate in our press conference. We have our part of our news team from Australia and India will be part of the conference. We're going to make some really great announcements. I'm dying to say so now because I have a big mouth and I like to talk, but I'm going to hold it for the conference, for the press conference, and make those announcements then. But I also want to say that part of this, a big part of it, is about our community. We now have a community of advocates for men and boys, and which, in my mind, is ultimately advocates for men, women, and children. But we have a growing community. I will be meeting some people for the second time. I will be meeting a lot of people for the first time. Part of this conference is to reach out to each other. It is a conference for the attendees. We're going to live stream it, but nothing replaces being there. Nothing replaces it, and I'm going to risk embarrassing him Dr. Farrell is one of the most incredible people. As somebody that's been in his presence, the impact of his warmth and humanity is lasting. So I'm going to say it again. If you have a chance to meet Dr. Farrell, don't miss it. And come join us and come meet the people that you've seen writing on ABFM, doing radio shows. Come meet all these other great advocates and activists that are going to come together in one place as a community and start looking toward the future of what this movement is about and what we can accomplish, because this conference is not an end, it's just a first step.
Indeed. And please do come and meet all 6'8" of Paul Elam. We'll have fun together. We really want to welcome everyone to come. It's going to be a great time. We want you to be there. And gentlemen, I think that's it for tonight. Is that good?
That's great.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good for me. Good night, everybody.
Good night.